Welcome back to Desk Careers. I'm so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are speaking with Dr. Osama, who's out in the West Midlands, close by Birmingham. Welcome, Dr. Osama. I'm so excited to have you with us today. We
Hi,
are
everyone.
going to be talking about a really specific topic in memory of a very special month. It is November, and we're going to talk about men's health in specific. But before we do that, maybe you can take us through a little bit about yourself so that we can understand who Dr. Osama is and what brings you to this conversation.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. Welcome. So I was born in the Middle East, actually. Then I moved to England, where I did my second school education. I did my medical school. So that was 5 years ago. And I've been a practicing doctor for 5 years now. And I'm specializing now in radiology, which is a discipline in medicine, where you kind of look at scans and treat cancer, basically. This is where I am in life right now. So men's health is a topic I am quite passionate about because it affects a lot of males, and generally males don't really seek treatment in the same way that perhaps females do. That's a huge generalization, by the way, but it's just one of those facts, unfortunately. So that's why I'm passionate about it, because it's important to promote fitness and health amongst males.
It is so very, very important. And I think you're right. I think we need to create more awareness for men. I know this is a generalization, but it almost feels like men don't get as much attention in the media when it comes to taking care of their health, or there are only really specific types of awarenesses, heart issues, stress and anxiety, but rarely in the detail that we want to be talking about today. So I know we have some very curious aspiring medics who are very, very curious about men's health. And I thought that we could be dedicating this conversation to just that. So the first question that I know is on the top of my mind is, what does cancer, when we think about men's health, what is the most prominent types of cancers that we see more often in men than women?
Okay, that's a very good question. So cancer is, as we know nowadays, more common than it used to be before. Cancer usually is associated with older men, I must say, because essentially what happens in cancer is that you have cells that kind of divide out of control, and they become like into a mass, and then that mass could potentially spread. So that's what cancer is. So the most common types of cancer in males are still also the most common types of cancer in females too, like lung cancer, for example. However, there are specific types of cancer that only affect males. For example, testicular cancer and prostate cancer. There are actually very rare, very, very rare times where a female can also get prostate cancer, but this is extremely rare, like one in humanity or something. But I read a case report of that. But testicular cancer is the one to watch out for younger males. And then for older males, it's prostate cancer. So males above 55.
So is there anything a man can do to prevent those specific types of cancer? Is there anything that they need to be paying attention to? You mentioned one, it tends to happen in younger men than the other. Is there anything that we should be really paying more attention to?
Yeah, good question. So the risk factors for cancer is the same for risk factors for most cancers. For example, dietary, smoking, living a healthy lifestyle. Those kind of things will help you live a healthier life in general and also avoid developing cancer. The other things to watch out for is that you can actually, if you detect cancer early enough, you can treat it and you'll have a much higher survival rate than if you left it for too long. So one of the ways, for example, to look out for testicular cancer is to do a physical examination of your private parts every now and then, just to make sure there's no new lumps or anything like that. And then if you do feel you have that, then you should see a healthcare professional as soon as you can. Usually, most of the cases when you have something like that, it doesn't mean to be anything bad. It could just be simply an infection or something else. But in the rare cases, that it could be a cancer. Just to give you perspective, I think testicular cancer, the prevalence of it is 1 in 250 males. So it's quite a rare cancer. To put that into perspective, breast cancer, which affects largely females, is 1 in 9. So just to give you a bit of perspective on how common it is. So testicular cancer is not that common, but you should always check out, do a physical examination of your intimate parts just to make sure there's no new lumps.
And it's quite a sensitive topic for I know for women or mothers to be having with their sons, or wives to be having with their husbands, because I think men, they really identify with their masculine parts, don't they? So how can a male feel comfortable? What are some of the tips that as a doctor you would say, you know what, it's really important that you do this, and it might be embarrassing or you might feel a little bit shy, but it really is important? What are some of the tips or strategies you offer your patients?
Yeah, so that's a good question also. Yeah, I guess there is a lot of stigma attached to it, and it's not it's not open conversation you have like over dinner, for example. That's why it's good to raise awareness. And if you do, do your examination, tell your friends as well, like, look, guys, make sure you do this too. Because like, for example, with breast cancer, it's a very big campaign, national campaign in the UK to feel for any lumps, whereas we don't really have that for testicular cancer. I guess it's a rarer form of cancer, but it's still important to raise that, I actually know a colleague during medical school, we were studying about all these different types of cancers and stuff. And one of the things you get in medical school is called medical school syndrome, where whenever you read about a condition, you think you have that condition. So basically, we were doing all this like urology kind of topics regarding like men's health and the testes and how it develops, etc. And he actually examined himself and realized he only had one testicle, and he had not known that until the age of like 24 years old. So I was like, that's quite crazy to live your whole life without knowing that. Right.
Yeah.
And it's actually a risk factor too, because what happens is when you develop in the fetus, your testes actually descend downwards. So some people are born with an undescended testicle, and they have to have that corrected so it becomes in the right place and it grows properly. But he never had that. So I was like, it made me think. I was like, how many people are living without knowing that they don't have, for example, they're missing one, or their full complement of anatomy is not there. So yeah, you make sure, I tell all my patients, make sure you regularly examine yourself to make sure everything's fine. And if you're worried about anything, go see a healthcare professional. And I mean, so the next step, if you were to be worried, is an ultrasound scan, which is a completely painless exam to assess for the testicles. So I think all males should do it from an early age.
Okay, so when you say early age, what age would you ideally think this is a good age you should start then?
So, so testicular cancer, usually the prevalence of it is between the ages of 20 and 30, I guess. But when you're 16, you should start regularly knowing about your body a bit more, just to know what your normal is like. And obviously, you're still developing at that age. But yeah, it's important to, from an early age, just get into the habit of knowing what your anatomy is like, knowing, what you should be like, what your normal is, because normal for different people is different, right? So that's why you should start at an early age, I would say.
Fantastic. Now, how can a man tell, or how can a young man tell, oh, this is testicular cancer, for example? I know that you might feel something and then you have to get it checked, but is there anything common that before you get to the doctor that makes it very apparent, or is it just you really need to go and a doctor will have to diagnose that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, cancer is one of those things where it's very difficult it's not one symptom, it could be a multitude of symptoms, and it affects different people differently. But the telltale sign is to have just a suspicious, like, hard lump on one of your testicles. Like asymmetry is a big thing, or if there's any pain, that's another one. But usually, as I said, those symptoms are not caused by cancer. They're usually caused by something else, like an infection, maybe like an STD, sexually transmitted infection, or just inflammation or something else. But in the rare cases, it could be cancer.
So when we're thinking about screenings, what are the most widely available screenings for men or for young men?
So screening is basically a physical examination. That's screening. So you just feel your testicles, make sure they're both kind of symmetrical, and no hard lumps and no pain. Those are the signs, really.
Now, with women, they're encouraged, very heavily encouraged, like you said, with the campaigns that go on. And then they're encouraged by their peers, their families to get regular checkups. And with men, is that the same, or are they more likely encouraged only to go if they feel something abnormal? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I think that the difference is that the screening programs, so screening programs are only effective, I'd say, if they're cost effective, especially in our healthcare system in the UK, because it's a public owned healthcare system. So that's why the women's screening program is very promoted, because 1 in 9 patients suffer from breast cancer. So it's a very common type of cancer. With men, unfortunately, testicular cancer fortunately, it's less prevalent. Hence why there's no like national screening program for it. However, it's a physical examination. You just feel if there's anything abnormal, you should go see a doctor. But yeah, there's other screening programs available in the UK. I don't know what it is like in UAE, but there are, for example, screening programs for colon cancer, because that's more common, right? But for younger patients, the most common type of cancer for this age group is probably testicular cancer, specifically to males. So that's why you should start feeling your testicles early.
Okay, so let's talk a little more about men's mental health. We know that with research and with the studies, and there's more of an awareness that emotional symptoms can then show up into physical symptoms, which are an onset to mental health, stress, and anxiety. What kind of stress do you see most often coming through your doors with patients when men or young men are involved? What are the most common stresses that affect their mental health, which then kind of become even larger and eventually affect their physical health?
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, because we're talking about cancer right now, but actually one of the biggest killers in males, for younger males especially, is first of all just random accidents. So that's a big killer, like for example road traffic accidents and things like that. Actually, the second biggest killer worldwide is suicide. So mental health is actually a bigger killer of young males than actually cancer or heart disease or any of those kind of conditions. So it's a very important topic that we discuss, actually. With regard to what causes your mental health to depreciate, I think mainly it's probably a lack of resilience training when growing up. And even I didn't really have any kind of resilience training when I was in school. I think it's a really important thing, because life's actually quite tricky, to navigate life, especially as any kind of human. It's difficult. There are things that you don't know about that happen, and there's ups and downs. And I feel like no one really discusses those things, and I feel like it should be discussed. And there's a big stigma around people coming forward and discussing those things, and hopefully we're tackling that kind of stigma. But yeah, I think a lot of from my experience, from what I've seen, and so I went to medical school in London, in a part of London called South Kensington, which is a really posh area of London, like one of the richest areas of London and probably the world, right? And I did a lot of my shadowing there. And what I noticed was that, so in medical school, what happens is you shadow different practices. So you shadow like the posh parts of London, and also you might be in some other parts of London. And I was in a GP practice there, so a family practice there. So we saw a lot of patients coming in and out with kind of these problems. And I was actually shocked, because so I was in the richest part of London, and the people in the richest part of London had very similar symptoms and experiences as other more deprived areas of London. And a lot of patients were on antidepressant medication, because mental health is such a big thing, and it affects everyone. Like, it doesn't just affect you if you're from a certain demographic. It could affect anyone at any moment in time. So it's important to, if you have any kind of, if you don't know how to deal with certain things, it's important to ask for help. That's one of the biggest things. Discuss your family or your support network. And sometimes, you don't know who to turn to. And I'm sure there's loads of organizations in Dubai or UAE to tackle mental health. In the UK, we have quite a few organizations, but unfortunately they're heavily underfunded, if you need someone to talk to. But it's important to, if you think you're suffering from any kind of low mood, it's important to come forward and talk about these things, because it's the biggest killer. right
So
now.
I think, socially, men and boys are still taught to kind of suck it up and deal with it and overcome it. I still see this stigma attached to one
Yeah,
gender over another. And I think that females are always more encouraged to talk about their feelings. You see this more. And of course, we're generalizing and we can't generalize. But
yeah,
when we are talking about men's health, if we are going to be talking about mental health, I think sometimes we see, or I see when I'm working with young people, that they're not able to recognize when it is time to ask for help. I think sometimes
yeah,
young men will kind of think, well, it's okay, I can handle it. But they go from handling it to, overdrive, and they
yeah.
don't see the fine line between. So maybe you can help us put it into context for any young man or any younger boy listening to this interview right now, and if they could kind of have some kind of a spectrum of when, if you get to this stage, it really is a signal for you to ask for help.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think the thing is that kind of threshold is different for different people. It's kind of, we have a like a saying in the UK, is the straw that broke the camel's back. So it could be just one little thing that could completely be catastrophic to someone, and it's different to different people. It's, I guess what it is your interpretation of different events, right? So, for example, you could walk down the street and someone could smile at you and like, oh, that's so nice, the guy smiled at me. Or sometimes you walk down the street and someone's like laughing, and for some people that might be just be normal, but then for some people might think, oh, he might be laughing at me, and then it turns into kind of a downward spiral, if that makes sense. So it's your interpretation of what's going on, and for different people it's different. So it's difficult to set like a threshold for where you should seek treatment. But what I think is important to do is to offer everyone resilience training. By that I mean like ways, strategies to cope with things when they're not optimal. Because in life, there's going to be times where things are not going to be optimal. There's going to be times where you think, oh my God, I'm failing this exam, I feel terrible. Also, there's times where you're going to feel really happy and you're going to be, oh my God. And there's times where you're going to be super happy. And that's good, because life is about ups and downs. But it's about offering that resilience training. So when you go through hardship, you know how to cope with that. And you're right, it's difficult. For me, for a medical professional, it's difficult to set like a threshold where you say, okay, if you're not sleeping, for example, this many hours, and you're not doing this and not doing that, then come seek medical help, because it's different for different people. But I think one of the biggest things is if you ask yourself, like, how do I feel? Every day you should ask yourself, how do I feel? Am I happy about how things are going, or am I sad about how things are going? And if your answer is that you're sad about how things are going for multiple days at a time, then you should go seek help, I think.
Wonderful. I completely agree. It's almost like take an audit of your emotions, because I think you do need to have some kind of a context to, especially
Yeah,
when you're younger and you don't really know yourself, sort of like what you were saying with testicular screening, and check yourself as regularly as possible. So kind of check in with your emotional resilience and see, am I close to that tipping point? Because I think for young boys who are not comfortable expressing themselves, they really struggle with asking for help. And I think what my concern is, especially when we're talking about men's health and men's mental health, is that they get to that tipping point and then it almost spirals out so much that
yeah.
it becomes too late, and then we start to see tragedies as you described. Now let's go back to talking a little bit about men and their physical health. If we can help a young boy understand what a healthy urination cycle is, and then maybe what kind of a red flag type of urination cycle would be, how
Sure.
would you describe that to them?
Sure. So on average, you should be going to the toilet depending on how much you drink. I recommend drinking a lot of water because water is really good for you. So depending on how much water you drink, so you should be going to the toilet every 3 to 4 hours, so 6 to 8 times a day in a 24-hour period. But then this also depends on your diet as well. So, for example, if you drink a lot of caffeine makes you go to the toilet more often than other drinks because it's a diuretic. But I'll say red flags to look out for, especially in the young. is if you're waking up from sleep to go to the loo multiple times in a sleep period, I think that's a red flag, because that could be a sign of early onset diabetes. Because what happens in diabetes is that your level of sugar goes up in your body, and then your body wants to excrete more sugar to get rid of it, and so you urinate more. So waking up at night multiple times, that could be a red flag. If you see any blood there, that could be a red flag, but that could be a red flag for many things, like an infection or even cancer. So if you see any blood in there, and then if it's painful to urinate as well, that could be a red flag.
What I'm hearing you say is they really need to be paying attention to those little symptoms and not dismissing them, really paying attention. And that is the key.
Yeah.
And also going back to what you said right at the beginning, not to over analyze, just to go see someone and just clear out any things. And it might, most likely would probably be something easily to overcome. So don't kind of panic and plan the end of your moments just yet.
With this kind of things, because as I told you, when I went to medical school, when you study these conditions, when you type any condition into Google, you're like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. When you type any symptom, it's like, it's definitely cancer. But we have to realize that all these conditions are kind of rare. They're not common. So it's less likely to be cancer, but it could be that. So you might as well go get checked out. But it's important to know what healthy is for you, For some people, they can go to the toilet once a day and that's fine for them. But some people will have to go 10 times a day. It's a spectrum.
And getting to know your body and getting to know what that feels like. So just as we're winding it down and bringing it together, regular checkups, you said, is boys should be doing these regularly at home. And when they feel something abnormal, that they should be reaching out for help and going to see someone to do that. We talked specifically about testicular cancer because it affects those younger boys. But we also talked about mental health, and the common theme that I'm hearing you say again is be aware of your body. Don't kind of sit by yourself and overstress about these things. Reach out to someone for help, and just to remember that the cases for men, 1 in 250, I think you said?
Yeah, for testicular cancer.
For testicular cancer. So, the likelihood is that you'll be okay, and you just want to be checking in on yourself. Did I forget anything, Dr. Osama?
No, that was a perfect, succinct summary. I think you summed it up better than what I could have said.
Awesome. Wonderful. I know that we want to talk to you about so many other things, but we're going to bring it to an end today because we were focusing on men's health and men's mental health. Dr. Osama, how can we find you if we want to learn a little bit more?
Oh, yeah, sure. So you can find me on my Instagram page if you want. That's at Dr. OJ. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, I guess, Osama Al-Jibri. If you also want to just email me, if you have any questions about, say, medical school applications or your health or anything like that, then my email address is oaj333@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Osama. And that brings us to the end of another incredible conversation. Today, we were speaking about men's health and men's mental health. We were speaking with Dr. Osama, who is based in the West Midlands, close to Birmingham. Thank you for watching, and we will see you at our next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight.